Good evening. I'm Debbie Lunder, Chair of the Friends of the Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and introduce our speaker tonight, David Lang. Professor of Music Composition at the Yale School of Music, David just finished his first term in his appointment as the Institute's Artist in Residence. He holds degrees from Stanford University and the University of Iowa, and received a DMA from the Yale School of Music in 1989. In 2008, he was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for his piece, The Little Match Girl Passion, which the New Yorker called one of the most original and moving scores of the year. His music has been performed by musical, dance, and theatrical organizations throughout the world, including the Santa Fe Opera, the New York Philharmonic, the San Francisco Symphony, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Kronos Quartet, the Nederland Dance Theater, and the Royal Ballet, and his music has been performed in the most renowned concert halls and festivals in the US and Europe. Well known as the co-founder and co-artistic director of New York's legendary musical festival, Bang on a Can, David was Musical America's Composer of the Year for 2013, and he held Carnegie Hall's Richard and Barbara Debs Chair in Composition for the 2013-14 season. In addition to pursuing his own creative work during his IAS appointment, David is curating the Institute's Edward T. Cohn Concert Series. We're so pleased that tonight he will talk about that series, which he organized around patterns rather than particular styles of music or periods of music history. Following the talk, David's going to take some questions, and if you would, please wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask your question. And now, please join me in welcoming David Lang.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello? Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. Okay. Yes, that's true. I am a composer, and I'm incredibly happy to be here. This is an amazing honor to be in this incredible place. The first thing I have to say is it's wonderful that a place so august as this has chosen to have an artist involved. And I have to say, on behalf of my entire field and discipline, thank you for making that a composer. I mean, I notice you did not choose choreographer in residence, slam poet in residence. I mean, there are lots of other kinds of things that you could have chosen. I'm very happy that you chose us, right? Which is really great. I'm also, in particular, very grateful to be here because, you know, I have a little apartment here, just a 5-minute walk around the corner, and when I come here, I work. You know, so the very first thing I did when I got here with my wife in September was we went to Trader Joe's and we bought 5 years worth of supplies. And we come here, and then, you know, we don't go out of the house for days because we're just working, which is fantastic. It's an incredible gift. So thank you very much. The great thing about programming music here also, I have to say, is knowing that people come back. Because sometimes you program concerts and you think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is a one-time deal. This is one opportunity to have a conversation with you. The thing about this community, for the friends and for the fellows, is that people come back. So what's possible, you know, I was given this job of curating concerts here for the next 3 years. And I started thinking, you know, because people come back, because people are curious and intelligent and motivated, and most of all, because people are going to be seeing lots of different concerts, it might be interesting to try to put these concerts in dialogue with each other, to have them actually be something that adds up to a larger issue. And one of the reasons why I feel that is because as a composer, especially a composer of classical music, I feel like I spend my entire life trying to justify why I am here. Because all of my friends, and probably many people you know, They know more about popular music of many different periods than they know about classical music. So all the time growing up, I would say to my friends I was a classical musician, and they would look at me like I was a Martian. And when they would talk about the music that they liked, they would think that that's the entire universe. So I feel like to be a composer, in a way, is to not just say I have an opinion about the kind of music that I would like to write, but it actually opens up this entire universe of things that need to change in order for the world to appreciate classical music as an equal partner to the larger musical environment, because popular music is so prevalent and other kinds of music are so popular and well established. So for me, what's interesting is that means that in order to be a composer, I feel like I've become an advocate for my field, not just for myself. And I feel, in a way, what I tell my students at Yale is that writing music is not just something that you do by yourself in your studio for yourself. It's something that you do to open up a conversation with somebody else. And once you realize that you are supposed to be communicating with someone else, you are responsible for every aspect of that communication that you can take advantage of. So you're responsible for whether or not the other person is in the right place to hear your piece, whether the players are the right people to play it, whether the way it is written about is the right way to write about it, the way everyone is dressed. You're responsible for the entire universe. So it's really kind of like a utopian responsibility for a composer, because you're saying, I can imagine something that doesn't exist yet that should exist. And in order to have it mean the most that it can mean, maybe everyone needs to be different in the audience. Maybe people need to be educated differently. Maybe it needs to be presented differently. So when I started thinking that way, I realized that one of the ways to get involved in this kind of utopian act was in curating concerts, was in this opportunity to say, it's not just my music that I am giving you, but it's an entire range of things, and here's the context in which I think the world I want to live in makes sense. So as I started this music organization called Bang on a Can in New York. This is actually our 30th anniversary, which is insane. And the reason why we started it was because we imagined that there was a way of talking about contemporary music that wasn't being tried. And that way was, it used to be that music was divided by style and by ideology. And so you would go to concerts in New York in the 1980s, and you would go uptown to Columbia, and you would see a piece by Elliott Carter, and you would see 5 pieces by composers who wished they were Elliott Carter. And then you would go down to the Knitting Factory, and you would see John Zorn, and you would see 5 composers who wished they were John Zorn. And so it started seeming to us that maybe we divided ourselves in this world in a way which doesn't help get anyone's message across. So maybe the thing to do is to say, what's innovative in the world? Not what kind of style it is, or what kind of education the people who made it had. Maybe the way to sort music would be to say, who wakes up in the morning in whatever discipline or genre and says, today I'm going to try to do something which challenges the music that I've inherited. And then we thought, let's look at all different kinds of musical fields, so classical music and pop music and folk music and world music, and see who's being innovative in that world, who's being innovative, and put all the innovators together. And then just say, that's what we do, right? And then you go to our concerts, and at least our idea was then maybe you would come out thinking that we live in a universe of people who are actually trying to push the things that we have inherited someplace interesting. So that, to me, is an example of using curation to try to build a different kind of audience and a different perspective. When I got this position, I thought, because I'm curating 12 concerts for people who will come back, can I just see who's been to a concert that I've curated here already? So yeah, see, this is amazing. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to kiss you all. But it's possible then to say, maybe I can be an advocate for my field, and I can explain a little bit to you about how music is made from the composer's perspective. And at the end of my 3-year position, this other argument about how music is made under the hood will be a little clearer to you. So when I was trying to think of something that would go across these 3 years, I thought something which doesn't really attach itself to any style of music is the idea of patterns. The idea of taking something small and using some sort of algorithm or some sort of process or some sort of idea of replication to build something large. And it happens in all different kinds of music. So this season, we have seen I wanted to begin at the beginning in Western music, so I began with the Macho Mass, which is a mass which takes little tiny rhythmic units and repeats them and expands them and superimposes them to build a larger structure. And yet it's completely in this other environment, this other religious environment, where the tunes and the Gregorian chant is received. So the interesting thing for me about that was that the pattern making was an attempt to say, well, we can't really play so much with pitch. We can't play with the melodies. On some level, someplace in this music, we need the Gregorian chant because the Gregorian chant is necessary for worship. So what's left for composers to play with? And so they found rhythm, and they built these structures out of rhythm, sort of as the only place that was left for them to experiment. The last concert, of course, the most recent concert was Bach-Goldberg Variations. And this was an example of a composer using variations to build these larger structures, to build this very complicated way of making his job more and more difficult as the piece goes along. So that was really exciting. But I thought I would tell you what's interesting from the pattern-making point of view of the concerts which are coming up. So there's a concert coming up next week. Are you coming? Who's coming? Yes. OK. So one of the things I talked about in last week was about what patterns mean to Bach, right? So Bach, of course, was very religious. And so Bach equated in his mind and in many of his religious works, the patterning exists to show you something about what he believes, right? Because he believes that we live in a world that has been ordered. And it has been ordered not just, by accident. It's been ordered on purpose by God. And so Bach's pointing out these patterns and using these patterns is a way of saying something about the world that he imagines he lives in. And it's very personal to him, and it's very deep. So that pattern making exists as a means of expression for him. That's not the way pattern making works in the concert coming up this weekend. The concert that we have this weekend is a concert of gamelan music. So gamelan is the metal orchestras that are played in Bali. And actually there's sort of a long, odd cultural story about it. This was something that local communities would do. They would have their own little metal orchestras, and people would play their metal instruments. And gradually, a few European musicologists at the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s, went to Bali and told them, oh, this music is really great. You should try to codify it and set it down, and you should make a big deal out of it. And so what we have of Balinese music is not exactly traditional music. We have a traditional music that's been rearranged to look like traditional music for Europeans from 100 years ago. So it's a little complicated. They're sort of like historic reenactors of Balinese music, but it's an incredible musical tradition. It's completely composed music, so it does exactly what I do, which is it makes decisions about who is playing what they are playing, what their rhythm is. It bosses them around. It tells them exactly when to do things, exactly what is right, what is wrong. And when something is wrong in Balinese music, you know. It's highly precise music. But the really interesting thing about Balinese music is it's not written down. It's not notated. There is no notation for Balinese music without nerdy Westerners coming in and trying to write it down. It is music which is made and learned by rote. So the way that it works, and this is what you will see when you come in next week, you will see this stage full of 30 musicians from Gamelan Galaktika in Boston. They will all be wearing traditional Balinese garb. And you will see a bunch of different instruments. Some of them are tiny little metal phones with 8 or 9 little bars, and they play with little hammers. You will see giant gongs, and you will see everything in between. So you'll see these metal instruments. And what you will notice is there's no written music. And every single part that is played was something that a master taught to a performer. So every time you see somebody do something, they're not making it up, they're not doing it on the spur of the moment. A master played it or sang it to the player, and the player memorized it. And this is where the patterns come through. The patterns are the memory device for this music. So when you hear this music, you are hearing music where the pattern, the discussion of the pattern, talking about the pattern, is the means of communication between the master and the performer. So that to me is really interesting. The pattern here is just practical. And by using these tiny little patterns that allow these people to memorize large swaths of music and piling these patterns on top of each other, you're going to hear this incredibly dense and complicated and really virtuosic sound. We are very lucky that the leader of this ensemble, Gamelan Galaktika in Boston, is a composer named Evan Ziporyn. So in addition to being a professor at MIT and being an incredible composer in his own right, Evan is somebody who moved to Bali after he graduated from college. And he immersed himself completely in Balinese music, and he is regarded as one of the West's great scholars in Balinese music. He is the first leader of a Western gamelan to have toured Bali. So, which seems like an incredible act of chutzpah to me, but somehow that's one of his credentials, which is incredible. And I thought I would play you a little bit of what his music sounds like so you can understand what's coming next week. And again, imagine this stage is full of all of these people sitting cross-legged on the floor with little sashes on their head. Okay. And this may be too loud because I forgot all of my settings, so I apologize. I'm stopping it because it goes on. But you see all those details that are made, all the crescendi and decrescendi, all the changes of speed, all the changes of loud and soft. It's so easy for me as a composer to make people do this. I just write on a piece of paper, get loud here, get loud, get quiet, speed up, slow down. It's so easy. all of these things that they do are things that are taught and learned right on the spot. Anyway, okay, so that's one example of something coming up. The concert after that is another use of patterns. And this has to go back to a kind of music historical kind of moment. So, you know, in the 20th century, we went through this period where music got a little hard to listen to, right? Music got very intellectual, it got very complicated, and also, for those of you who were here, Princeton was one of the places where music was really complicated. So we had composers like Milton Babbitt here. It was very highly intelligent, highly structured, very, very complicated music. And it was music that had a kind of scientific basis. So it was music that was trying to control every aspect of it and trying to use all sorts of abstract outside means from music to control what happened in a piece of music. What was interesting about that music, I mean, that's the music of my teachers, and so I love that music, and I understand that music, but one of the interesting things that happened was it set up a very strange dynamic between musicians and audiences, that the musicians knew more than the audiences that were listening to it. And when music is made with formulas, and when music is made with rules, and especially rules which are known to the composer and not known to the listener, it begins to create a kind of power imbalance, because it seems like the composer knows more than the listener. And sometimes that's great. You know, sometimes you want the composer to know more than the listener. But for young composers growing up in the 60s, this became a really kind of problematic and annoying thing, because it set up this distance between the people who made the music and the people who received the music. So a bunch of young composers in the 60s started rebelling against this. So, and we have this kind of music which we call minimal music, which is part of this reaction to it, but it's not the only reaction to it. So one of the reasons that composers in the 60s started trying to go to Bali was to figure out a way to challenge this other kind of music, to challenge this way of having a hierarchy between the people who know stuff and the people who know less stuff, right? So, and I have to say, having grown up in a, in a democratic household, it's always seemed very strange to me that the point of a piece of music was for me to go into a concert and write a piece of music whose premise was, I know more than you do. It should actually be, I am sharing something with you, or at least I think that. And so for these young composers in the 60s, they were trying to think, how do we break this? How do we get out and away from this idea that there's a hierarchy? One of the things they thought was maybe there's a way that we could all be equal, that a composer wouldn't be responsible for making every decision in a piece of music, but the composer would leave some freedom in it. And so we have the people who followed John Cage. Or maybe there's another way that we could do this, where a composer would set up a process and then would step back and would watch the process unfold. So, and at the same time, in the visual arts, if you think of an artist like Sol LeWitt, who, in his incredible essay, Sentences on Conceptual Art, is writing about how the point of this art is to say, here's this thing that can happen, and then you stand back, and the piece of work of art is the realization of this thing happening. So a whole bunch of composers were experimenting with different ways to make this kind of egoless music, a kind of music where a composer invents a pattern and steps back from that pattern, and then the composer and the listener are all equal in how that pattern gets resolved. So in order to show this to you, I want to perform a piece of music with you, right? So, and we're not going to play this music on on this festival. Okay, so this is just, we're just going to do it right now. And we're going to have to completely adjust it because I tested, you're supposed to stamp on the floor, but this floor doesn't make any noise, so we're going to clap. Okay, so this is a piece by a composer working in the 60s in New York called Stamping in the Dark. The composer's name is Daniel Good. And he's this very kindly, guy who lives in my neighborhood that I see all the time, who was there in the 60s when composers were trying to strip music down and figure out how to use processes to make music happen. Here's what we're going to do. On a given cue, we're all going to stand up, right? And we're going to clap, right? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to count together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then we're going to clap on 1. We're going to close our eyes, and we're going to count to 10 to ourselves. And then we're going to clap again when we've come to 1 and see if we're all together. And we're going to do it 10 times, right? Okay? So you have to keep track of the count that you are doing yourself, right? So I just want to point out this is a fully composed piece of music. There are instructions for this piece of music. You can follow them, and you can also do this piece wrong, right? So it follows all the rules of all the kind of fascist music that I grew up with. But because of the way the pattern works out, the result is unknown to us. And then the composer and the audience are equal in trying to understand how it works. Okay, so let's try it. So stand up. And I think you're going to have to clap really loud. Clap like you believe it, okay? So just to remind you, we're going to count out loud together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're going to go like this. And we're going to close our eyes then, and we're going to count to ourselves. And then when you come to 1 every single time, you're going to clap again, and we're going to do it 10 claps. Okay, ready? You ready? This is your Wolfenson Hall debut. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, give yourselves a hand. Okay, you may be seated. So again, this piece is totally composed. It's totally written out. It's totally determined. And yet, the end result is unknowable. You can't predict exactly where all those beats will happen, even though we are trying very, very hard to do it all together. So composers in the 60s were trying to figure out how do we use processes to make these pieces for us as a way of removing the ego of the composer, because the music that they were responding to, this highly intellectual music, was a highly ego-driven music of people saying, I know something and you don't. So this is all an introduction to another composer who became a little more successful than Daniel Good. This year is the 80th birthday of Steve Reich, and in fact, I programmed this concert a long time ago. I didn't realize there is a big Princeton festival of Steve Reich's music in 2 weeks. No, in the middle of March. So like the week before, or 10 days before, we are scooping them, because we have So Percussion here doing a concert of percussion music of Steve Reich. So I just want to play you the beginning of this piece, Drumming by Steve Reich, played by So Percussion here. And what I want you to listen for is there are 12 beats in this piece. There are 12 beats. And you hear bongos play. And gradually what happens is you only hear one note per 12 beats. And gradually, as this phrase goes on, all the different beats are filled. So in other words, he sets up this process where all he is doing is he is adding more notes until the entire melody is filled. So, and then he does something else with it, which is also pattern-based, but I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so you get the idea, right? And then what happens is he overlays these going at different speeds. And so you hear the clash of these two different speeds of these tunes. And then when he wants to thin the texture out, he just subtracts notes from that rhythmic grid. And then when he wants to build it back up, he builds them back up again. But it all comes from this same idea that happened in the 60s of composers using patterns as a way to step back. So I really had no idea how much I was going to be talking, and I see now that we have 20 minutes left, and I was planning on giving you a whole tour of all the music that I've curated for the next 2 years, which I see now is going to be impossible. So I will just say, oh, let me do this one. Okay. So the first concert next season is a piece of music that is a different kind of pattern. It is a piece of music by the American composer Frederic Rzewski. So Frederic Rzewski is a composer who is very political. And in fact, he has not lived in America for the last 50 years. And he is somebody who is also one of the great pianists of our day. An amazing pianist, and so he has a piece of music which is like a high water mark of piano culture called The People United Will Never Be Defeated. So it's 36 variations on the Chilean revolutionary song. And the way he does the variations is a pattern. And the pattern is it's divided into 6 groups of 6. And each one of these, there are 5 variations. Sorry, 5 variations. And then there's a 6th, which takes something from each one of these. So every 6th variation is sort of like summing up the 5 variations that were previous. And I think the idea behind this is that when you raise your fist to protest, you have 5 fingers, which are 5 separate things, and the 6th is bringing them all together. So this happens on the individual variation level, and it also happens on the entire level. So there's 6 variations. The last set of 6 variations also looks back over the entire cycle. The other thing which is really interesting is that this piece of music goes kaleidoscopically through all of piano music history. So you hear every style of piano music from Bach to jazz to the greatest Chopin, in his own paraphrase with this tune in the foreground. So I'm going to play you a little bit of it. Okay, so you get the idea, right? And that's Rzewski playing, amazing pianist. But we are going to be very lucky. We have the pianist Stephen Drury, who is an incredible virtuoso and a specialist in this piece, who is going to be playing this for us. And also, I thought it would be interesting to have this because of the Goldberg variations, and so you will be able to compare this one to that one. So other things that are happening, and I hope you come to everything. Was anyone here when the Crossing Choir sang my piece, The Little Match Girl Passion? So they're coming back, and they're singing a concert that includes music by last year's Pulitzer Prize winner Carolyn Shaw and the young composer Ted Hearn, and also a piece of mine called The National Anthems. We also have 2 seasons from now, I'm going to do Schubert Die Schöne Müllerin, one of the great uses of pattern making in how to tell a story. Very interesting. I've got a lot of great stuff coming up, and now I think it's time for questions. Okay, I'm sorry I ran out of time, but I'm a college professor. I can talk for hours about nothing. So, does anyone, Does anyone have any questions? Here's a question. which has no hierarchy of who's important and who does what. And in fact, the incredible thing is that in traditional Balinese music, the instruments that control everything, that control the speed, that control the shape, are the instruments that play the least. So you would think, oh, these people who are playing the melody, who are playing these super fast things. And the other thing you notice about gamelan music, which is unbelievably exciting, is that these are just pieces of metal. So you hit them and they ring forever. And so when you hit them, if you want to make a melody, you have to actually stop them when you are done. So the actions that you see the players taking are hitting this note, then they move to hit the next note at the same time they stop the last note. So their whole life is like this. So it's amazing. So I can't, traditionally there is no conductor. So, any more questions? You don't have to have any questions. Yes? I think there's a microphone coming, because,
Here it comes.
sorry.
Because of the venue that this is being, is this working? Oh, okay. It seems that I have to ask the question about the relationship between mathematics and music. How do you feel about it? And certainly the patterns that you've chosen seem to be in that area.
I think there's a pattern, there's a relationship, and I'm not totally sure I know what it is. You know, I was a chemistry student as an undergraduate, and so I've, you know, had many years of math and physics, and so I think that's related somehow to at least the way I look at what we're doing. I mean, I'm sure there are other people, like if you had chosen another composer in residence, they would tell you the most important thing is a beautiful melody, and then you would spend your entire years, you know, listening to here's Rachmaninoff and here's, you know, whatever. So, I mean, it could be that somebody else is going to present a different face of music that makes more sense to them. So, I'm not exactly sure. There are definitely things which are related between math and music, and they're kind of mysterious. So, and I don't really know what the connection is. I don't know. But they're really weird. Yeah. Yes?
There's a music that seems to have a pattern, and which is there's a music that seems to have a pattern and a type of music, and which is relevant for here because one of the most famous pieces is Einstein on the Beach,
right?
And that's repetitive music, Phil Glass in particular. So I was wondering if it enters your view of pattern music or if it's something different.
You mean Einstein? Or
Einstein on the Beach, so
Einstein on the
Phil
Beach?
Glass.
Yeah, well, you know, I used to work for Philip Glass. I used to be a music copyist for him. And so if you ever saw the opera Akhenaten, I typed all the words in the score, which was, you know, laborious, but really great. That music had meant a lot to me, and Einstein on the Beach is amazing, not just for the music, and the music is incredible, but also for the storytelling, for the fact that it's kind of oblique and hard to follow, and yet is actually about something very personal, or could be, right, depending on how you interpret it. So Einstein on the Beach is also kind of a high water mark for composers because it represents a complete act of courage on his part. To say he doesn't have a commissioner, he doesn't have somebody who's paying for it, he doesn't have anybody, you know, to take care of him, you know, so he's going to work with Robert Wilson. They're going to do the piece exactly the way they want to do. They're going to raise the amount of money they need. They're going to do it, you know, in the Metropolitan Opera that they rent, you know. So the musical part of it is very powerful. But the business part of it is also, and the kind of ambition, the kind of how this music belongs in the culture and it belongs, you know, kind of on a big stage. That's a part which I think has had a huge influence on us. And if you look at places like the Next Wave Festival at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, or any of the major presenters which do music, you know, most music now that's presented. You know, a lot of presenters want to have visuals with it, film. You know, Philip Glass was really the pioneer of all these different ways that music can alloy itself with different kinds of media to make something larger. I would say that he actually comes out of that world, that, you know, the Daniel Good clapping piece that we did and the early Steve Reich. But what's interesting is that that world was about stripping things down. So early minimal music was stripping things down. And very quickly, once you strip things down, you realize you have to figure out something to do to build them back up. And so the interesting thing for me about Einstein on the Beach is that he comes from this time period where people are counting patterns. And so what is it we like about Einstein on the Beach? Well, they actually count. They use the numbers, right? They sing the numbers. But are those numbers actually counting anything? You know, no, it's just, you know, to make you feel like you're in the presence of this world where things are counted and where counting matters and where pattern matters. All we have to do to access that feeling is just, you know, sing the numbers. So there's a way in which it's building up from this period where people were being very minimal, and it's doing it in this very kind of Baroque way. It's adding whatever he needs, changing whenever he needs, but starting from very simple means. That was kind of a rambling answer, I'm sorry. I was still back in the is mathematics and composition, because all I was thinking was I have one, you know, strange music and math fact. I mean, I have lots of strange music and math facts, but this one I really love. So the connection between the Fibonacci series and music, so of which there are many. But here's a really interesting one. So the piano octave on the keyboard. So there are 13 notes that you play to make an octave, and 13 is a Fibonacci number, right? So how is it split? It's split 8 white notes and 5 black notes. And how are they arranged? They're arranged from C to F, right? And then F to C. So F to C is 5 white notes and 3 black notes. And C to F is C to E is 3 white notes and 2 black notes. So when you start looking for these things, you see them everywhere. So anyway, yes?
I'm going to take this opportunity to display my ignorance.
I'm going to do the same.
Okay. So, you know, there's courses called like music appreciation and so forth, and when you think about them, you think, wow, you're going to sit down and listen to Mozart, and this is going to be beautiful. And then, based on your talk tonight, one gets a sense of the last 20, 30 years of, don't take offense, please, much more deliberate, possibly contrived, mathematical, what have you. And my question is, when I listen to Mozart now, am I supposed to be thinking about these intentional patterns, or am I supposed to be just enjoying the music?
I think, you know, the interesting thing about being a composer is that, and it's true for composers of any kind of music, is that there's a way in which you think that what we are doing is writing notes and melodies and harmonies and all this, but actually what we're doing is we're just managing people's attention. We're saying, look here, don't look over there, you know? So when you listen to Mozart, and if you're not listening to how beautiful the melodies are, you're in the wrong place, you know? And Mozart is doing everything he possibly can to say, oh, this is the place where I want you to pay attention. So I think these kinds of ego, the anti-ego music of Daniel Good or of Steve Reich, the early Steve Reich, is saying, I want you to pay attention to just this formal aspect of it so you won't pay attention to this other emotional aspect, because the other emotional aspect is exhausting, or the intellectual aspect that comes from that world I don't want to access. So, but every time you write a piece of music, you say, this is the most important thing that I want people to understand. How do I do things that support that? And also, how do I make sure I don't do anything that gets in the way of that? How do I make sure that other kinds of things that I can do? You know, when you sit in front of a blank sheet of paper, you can do anything. So a lot of this is deciding, well, what's the most important thing? You know, the most important thing is this piece is going to have the most beautiful chords. Well, then there are things that, that get in the way of having the most beautiful chords be heard. I think when we go back through music appreciation, we're hearing all of these pieces where those composers have successfully figured out how to keep our attention on the right thing, you know. But there are plenty of composers from Mozart's day who write in exactly the same harmony, in exactly the same format, where we listen to them and go, you know, there's something not quite right about it. You know, I'm in this world where melody really is important, and you know, that melody isn't very interesting. So I always think music appreciation is very dangerous. So because we study only great music from the past, but most of the music that's being written at any time is not very good. So, and that goes for now, and it goes for then. You know, most of the composers in Mozart's day were not very good. So here's a question. Well, a microphone is coming to you, and then I think you're officially the last question. So make it a good one. But make it one I can answer. Wait.
Do you see dance having a place in the patterned music?
Dance, I just had a premiere with the New York City Ballet this week, which was really fun. Dance is really important to me, and it's important to the world of music because choreographers hire us. Very important, you know. Dance needs music. So just like film needs music, just like theater occasionally needs music. So one of the things that's really incredible is that here is a place where, you know, all of these things that I am playing you and all these things that I'm presenting, we're sitting here in this kind of abstract, unnatural environment where we're watching people do these things, right? You know, there's not much to look at other than them. All these other places, like dance, for example, are places where the people really need music, where music has a real function, where you can tell whether or not it is working or it is not working.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the partnership between John Cage and Merce Cunningham.
Yeah. Well, that partnership is really interesting because it's not saying that, you know, so for those of you who don't know, so, you know, Merce Cunningham and John Cage wrote music separately. They wrote they made their work separately. So they would say the piece is going to be about this long, and John would go off and do his music, and Merce would go off and make his dance, and then they would put them together at the show, and that would be it. So that idea, so I'm actually going to be doing a John Cage piece here next year about these kinds of accidental collisions. And in fact, that's the topic of the piece, because it's a piece called Indeterminacy, which is a lecture that John Cage gave, and an actor from the Worcester Group, Paul Lazar, is going to come and he's going to give this same lecture. And the whole point was that these places where two things are happening that aren't coordinated, they actually are coordinated in your appreciation of them. So Cage says in his book Silence, there's no reason to have a formula that says why this note has to follow after that note, because you take any notes and put them next to each other, and our ear and we invent the formula that makes them coexist. And so that's kind of the idea that's behind that whole way of working. So,
David, thank you very much. I think the audience needs to clap with their eyes open.